Hello, my name is Beth Giddens and I'm a research facilitator at Portsmouth Hospital's University NHS Trust. I work with clinical researchers and research management staff to ensure the effective setup and ongoing management of research studies sponsored by the Trust. I also work in advisory capacity for researchers and guide them through various research processes. Last year, I graduated with a Master's in Research degree with the University of Portsmouth, where I undertook my own research in collaboration with the Macmillan Clinical Psychology Service at Queen Alexandra Hospital. I will use my own experience as a research student to make this session more meaningful for you as researchers. This is what this session will cover. So we'll do an introduction to project classifications when considering a project. We'll also look at an introduction to research governance and why we need this in research. We'll also look at the regulatory requirements for research within the NHS, so including ethics, health research authority approval. We'll also look at the introduction to the Integrated Research Application System, or known as IRAS, and how we actually apply for ethics. We'll also look at how we set up a study within your local R&D department. Firstly, it's important to understand whether your project is research, service evaluation, or an audit. Research can simply be defined as a project that generates new knowledge where there is no or limited evidence available and has the potential to be generalizable or transferable. If your project involves the following, it is likely that it will be classed as research. If your project involves recruiting participants as service users of the NHS or patients, your project involves recruiting NHS staff, your project involves conducting research activities at an NHS facility, for example, a hospital or a primary care site. If your project involves accessing NHS data that is not available to the public. Research projects will normally require regulatory approvals before it can start, for example, Research Ethics Committee or REC, and Health Research Authority, HRA approval. If you wish to carry out a research study, please contact your local R&D office as soon as possible to discuss the setup requirements. Service evaluation projects are designed to examine how standard care is delivered with the intention of generating information to inform local decision making. These types of projects do not require approvals such as REC or HRA. At Portsmouth, we will require a proposal to ensure it meets the criteria of a service evaluation, and we will issue a confirmation letter. You may need other approvals within your department. An audit measures existing practice against evidence-based clinical standards. At Portsmouth, you will need to contact the research office, and the research department do not need to be informed of this. You can find out more information about project classifications on Portsmouth Research internet page. The rest of the presentation will now cover how we manage research projects. Firstly, research is beneficial, it benefits everybody. So within the NHS Constitution, the NHS is committed to continuous improvement in the quality of services participants receive, identifying and sharing best practice in quality of care and treatments. Participation in research also helps patients feel empowered and more involved with their conditions and care, as well as opening up the opportunity for access for new treatments. By being a high-quality research site, it brings reputational value to a trust and being recognised as a scientific leader in clinical research. And finally, research active trusts are associated with lower risk-adjusted mortality of acute admissions. In research, our main priorities are focused on participant well-being and high-quality data. Therefore, there are a set of regulations, principles, and standards we need to adhere to. The standards for clinical research were first introduced over 70 years ago. Declaration of Helsinki was the first standard produced in 1964 by the World Medical Association. This addressed both protection of research participants and guidance on the scientific standard expected in research. During World War II, a number of Nazi physicians conducted painful and often deadly experiments on thousands of prisoners without their permission. Considering lack of consent and questionable research standards, modern scientists overwhelmingly reject the use of results from experiments in the camps. The Nuremberg trials, conducted after the war, led to the development of the Nuremberg Code. These are 10 principles for conducting research and are still relevant today. This includes the need for informed consent and research being conducted by qualified individuals. These research standards are important for a range of reasons. This safeguards and protects research participants. It also protects yourself as researchers. This reduces any risk that participants may face when recruited into a study, and we look at how risk can be mitigated. This also ensures excellent quality of data and outcomes, and it encourages excellent research and scientific practice. The UK policy framework in health and social care was published in 2017, replacing the research governance framework from 2005 with a single modern set of principles for the UK. It sets out what good health and social care research looks like. It makes sure that good health and social care research is safe. It is scientific and ethically sound with relevant approvals in place. It is legal and compliant. It involves the public and lets people know whether or not they want to take part. And also ensures integrity and transparency. Within research, everybody has a role to play. So conducting clinical research studies is a team effort, and it is important that everyone involved in research understands their responsibilities. So firstly, we have the sponsor. So a sponsor is responsible for the initiation, management and finance of a study. Studies will have a chief investigator who will be responsible for studies across all recruiting sites, or a site, a single site. If you're doing a PhD study, a PhD student can be listed as a chief investigator. However, for master's projects, supervisors will have to be listed as a chief investigator. We'll then bring this down to a local level, and we have a principal investigator. Are responsible for gaining R&D approvals, making sure that staff are sufficiently trained in carrying out their roles, and also delegating duties. A student can be a principal investigator regardless if they're doing a PhD or master's project. And then finally, everyone else's responsibilities. We are all responsible for the safety and well-being of our participants, and we're also responsible for high quality data and collection. We'll now look at the regulatory requirements needed for NHS research studies. In March 2020, student research projects were paused to create capacity for urgent COVID-19 research. And following this, new eligibility criteria was introduced from the 1st of September 2021. For more information, if you just search HRA student research, there'll be further guidance. So briefly, for students carrying out projects at master's level, if you're carrying out a qualification which is for your professional training, so for example, scientist training program, your project will be eligible for ethics review. However, if you are carrying out a qualification purely for academic purposes, then unfortunately your project would be ineligible for ethics review. For doctorate level projects, all applicants are eligible to carry out health and social care research and will be eligible for ethics review. All health and social care research will be required to have a sponsor. A sponsor takes on the overall responsibility for proportionate, effective arrangements being in place to set up and run and report a research study. It is important to bear in mind that an employer or funder is not automatically a sponsor for the study. The UK policy framework states that universities should accept the role as sponsor for all educational research conducted by their students, regardless if it's a PhD or master's project. As we discussed, all activities we undertake is governed by two key principles: patient safety and high quality data. Good clinical practice is an international ethical and scientific quality standard for designing, recording and reporting trials that involve the participation of human subjects. You can access training via NIHR Learn. There are different regulatory approvals required before you can start doing research in the NHS. REC and HRA approvals are the most common types of approvals needed. The research ethics committees protect the rights, safety and well-being of research participants recruited into research. Health Research Authority considers the governance and legal compliance needed in research. You can see below some other examples of regulatory approvals which may be needed in research. This will depend on what type of research an investigator team will do. Regardless of what type of regulatory approval you will need, all applications are made through the Integrated Research Application System, known as IRAS. You may wish to refer to HRA decision tools if you're not sure if you will need REC approval. Please note that this tool will be unable to tell you if you need other regulatory approvals. This is what the application pathway on IRAS looks like. You will only need to complete one application online and will be assessed by the relevant regulatory bodies, for example, HRA and REC. Before approvals can be issued, the relevant committee may have some queries about your application and you will be given the chance to respond to these. All being well, your application will be approved. When you start a new project on IRAS, you will be asked to complete project filter questions. These filter questions are the first key step for IRAS to determine which questions are enabled in the integrated data set and which relevant application forms are created. The integrated data set is where you enter your research project details. As you complete each question, these forms are simultaneously populated to avoid any duplication. Research Ethics Service provide two types of ethical review for applications. This is proportionate review, or PR, or a full committee review. Proportionate review is an accelerated, proportionate review of research studies which raise no material ethical issues, and these are reviewed via email by a subcommittee. Eligibility will be assessed when you book your application in for review on IRAS. Examples of studies which meet proportionate review include tissue or data anonymous to the researcher, tissue already taken with consent for use in research, extra tissue with consent, questionnaires or research and focus groups which are not highly sensitive topics, minimally invasive basic science studies involving healthy volunteers. Applications which are not eligible for proportionate review will be reviewed at a full REC meeting. You are recommended to attend this meeting. The research committee will ask you questions regarding ethical issues from a review of your application to seek assurance that all ethical issues have been addressed. Once you have booked your application in for a review, yourself, your university supervisor and sponsor representative will receive an email from the REC confirming your application has been booked. As well as completing your IRAS application, you will need to submit some supporting documents. You'll be able to upload these on the checklist tab on your application page on IRAS. The checklist itself is quite extensive and you may need to only use a select few documents listed. The protocol and the Chief Investigator CV are mandatory documents to all applications. The documents you upload to your IRAS application will need to be version controlled. This includes a version number, the full document date, and the IRAS number. Lack of date and version number is one of the main reasons that applications cannot be validated. Templates and further guidance can be available from your local R&D office or your university. The next few slides will cover what type of documents you may need for your research project. The first document is the protocol, which is an essential part of a research project. This gives a full description of the research project and acts as a manual for the research team. The participant's journey through the study should also be clearly described, and the safety implications. Recording and reporting should also be specified. It is important to remember that your protocol will be reviewed by a REC, which consists of not only health professionals, but also lay members of the public, so make sure that appropriate language is used throughout. Since the study sponsor bears overall responsibility for the design of the study, the protocol must be designed in agreement with them. The protocol should also be kept up to date as the research study progresses and be version controlled. You can see here how a protocol can be structured, including the background and rationale, theoretical framework, and the research question. You can find some protocol templates from your local R&D office or from the Health Research Authority website. Participant Information Sheet, or PIS, should support the consent process by helping to ensure participants who are invited to a research study have received sufficient information. Effective informing should enable potential participants to make an appropriate decision that is right for them. It is important that participants are able to understand the information given to them and consider this information in light of their own circumstances. The PIS also provides potential participants with information to share with others who may be important to them and who would they like to involve in the decision-making process. When you are writing your PIS, you will need to consider the what, why, who, where approach. Some other things to bear in mind when you're writing the PIS. You want to consider the consent arrangements and making sure that these match the study requirements and any risks and benefits. If the information sheet is too long, potential participants may not read all of it. Consider the layout of the PIS to make it easier to read. You also want to use a polite and conversational writing tone to making sure that your study is inviting. You want to write your patient information sheet in plain English and avoid any jargon. You also want to consider the patient perspective and also consider using PPI groups to test your PIS. Research standards emphasise the need for informed consent and needs to be indicated in some way. Depending on what your study involves, this could be written, oral, or non-verbal. The purpose of the consent form is to document the participants' decision and to demonstrate that the informed consent process was carried out appropriately and with suitable discussion. The principles of consent include consent should be treated as a process rather than a single event. It is an ongoing process throughout the study and takes time. Everyone involved in receiving informed consent from a participant has responsibility within the process. For example, by familiarising themselves with the study protocol and undertaking informed consent training. When you are developing your IRAS application, you may want to consider patient and public involvement in your study, or PPI. At Portsmouth, we have an active and growing group of patient research ambassadors who support researchers in several ways, including ensuring of citizens, patients and carers are considered during study design and setup, engagement and communication activities with members of the public, strengthens ethics applications and good for publications. This also means better questions, outcomes and analysis. It enhances quality and relevance of the study that you're doing. And funders and recs like to see where you have sought PPI input. Here are some tips for successfully completing an IRAS application. There's a project filter, so making sure that all questions in the project filter are completed and your selections accurately represent your project. Data, so make sure that you complete all fields within the form and are marked as complete. Supporting documents, making sure that all documents are uploaded to the checklist tab and are version controlled. Authorisations, electronic authorisations are in place for all declarations in the form and are shown as valid. Authorisations will come from the chief investigator, the sponsor representative, and your supervisor. When you are submitting for ethical review, book your application in for review before you electronically submit it. The REC cannot access the formal supporting documents until then. IRAS applications also include a transfer feature, where as the owner of the application, you can send your IRAS application off to other individuals to review, for example, your supervisors, co-investigators, or R&D. Individuals will need to have an IRAS account set up to use this feature. You may also wish to access the e-learning on the IRAS website. You may need to submit a completed copy of a Schedule of Events Cost Attribution Template, or SOCAT, and an Organisational Information Document, an OID. The SOCAT will help ensure that appropriate resources are identified to support study delivery and that there is clarity for participating NHS organisations about how the costs are associated with participation in study attributed. You can find out further information on SOCATs on the NIHL's website. The organisational information document can act as the agreement between the sponsor and the participating NHS organisation, and is part of the local information pack. The OID will also outline any study-specific activities for sites, for example, recruiting participants, handing out questionnaires. During setup, the OID will need to be signed by the site's R&D office and by the sponsor. Please speak to your local R&D office and your university supervisors for further guidance for these documents. So once you have submitted an application for REC review, you'll receive a confirmation email confirming this has been booked in. But this outlines what happens at a REC meeting. A research ethics committee is made up of volunteers, this of mixed and lay experts. The application will be sent to REC members prior to the meeting date, so they have enough time to review your application. REC members will discuss the application together before meeting with the researcher. Researchers are recommended to attend the meeting. This can be done via Zoom or over the phone. What the REC for are looking in your application. They are looking for the social or scientific value of your research, the recruitment plan and access to health information and how you're demonstrating fair participant selection, any risks or benefits and how you'll mitigate these, the safety and protection of participants, informed consent process and the adequacy of research participant information, suitability of the application supporting staff, and suitability of supporting information. When I went through the REC review for my master's project, these are some tips that I would recommend for surviving a REC meeting. See if your supervisor can join you at the REC meeting, not to discuss the application, but also to provide moral support. I'd recommend you familiarise yourself with the study, consider how you'll discuss your study and identify any issues there may be, and think about how you will justify this. Give yourself plenty of time before the meeting. For example, if you're attending the meeting on Zoom, make sure everything is working. Maybe grab a cuppa as well whilst you're waiting. Have copies of your documents to hand. The REC may make comments to certain documents, so it's always good to have these to hand and make notes. Keep calm. It can be a daunting feeling to have a committee read and scrutinise your work. Remember, these committees are in place to ensure participant well-being. Safety is at the centre of your research. Finally, celebrate the milestone. Preparing an IRAS application and writing study documents is a lengthy process and requires a lot of time and effort. You'll look back on this and think to yourself how far you've come. I know I have. Following your REC meeting, you will receive an outcome following this. These will be one of 4 options. You'll have a favourable opinion with standard conditions, favourable opinion with additional conditions, a provisional opinion, or an unfavourable opinion. Common reasons for a provisional opinion or an unfavourable opinion being issued is that it is unclear if procedures are standard care or study specific. The recruitment strategy needs to be clearer, including who will approach participants. Clarity is required on who will be accessing the data. And clarification needed regarding a complaints procedure. This is a study setup process once you have received approvals. Step 3 outlines the setup pathway at PHU. The setup pathway at your hospital may differ from Portsmouth, so it's important to understand what is involved at your organisation. The setup pathway is a team effort, making sure all the necessary local approvals are in place and the team are ready to deliver the study. Some next steps before you start your research. Discuss sponsorship with your university supervisor and agree who will act as sponsor. Contact your local R&D office as soon as possible to discuss setup requirements. Set up your IRAS account, have a look at the e-learning, have a playthrough on the system, get familiar. Do your GCP training. And finally, just some words of wisdom. When you are designing your study, the simpler the explanation, the more likely it is that the output will be useful to others. Thank you for listening to this session. If you're interested in doing research at Portsmouth, you can contact us on the following contact details.